My name is Chris Yee, and I'm making a 3D puzzle platformer called Nectar. In the game, you play as a potted sunflower with his bumblebee companion, using nectar to grow plants and manipulate the world. In this video, I'm going to talk about the rope in my game, and you might be thinking, hey, haven't you done that before? And you are correct. In Devlog 6, I went over the process that I went through to get a working tightrope into my game, and it actually took over a month to get a working version of that tightrope that I was happy with. I'll put a link to that episode in the description below. But despite the amount of time that it took me to make that rope, I decided that I wanted to make the rope even more complicated. Early on I had the idea to make a slingshot for the game so you could shoot different items across the map and use that to solve different puzzles, and it just made sense to implement this mechanic into the rope that already existed in my game. Now I had the slingshot in mind when I first started making the tightrope, and I was able to set it up in a way that would eventually make it easier for me in the future. So luckily, this did not take me a full month to do. If you haven't watched my other video about the tightrope, the way it works is there's an invisible sphere that has no collision, and the player attaches to that sphere. And the sphere itself has physics constraints applied to it, which allow it to bounce and have the bounciness of a tightrope. And then the visuals of the tightrope that you see are actually all just cosmetic. They don't actually have any function, they're just adjusting their position according to where that sphere is. Now to make the slingshot work, I could use this invisible sphere, which I was calling the attach point. So I can move the attach point to the midpoint of the rope, and then I can attach the object that I'm shooting to that attach point. And then if I pull the attach point back, it looks like a slingshot. And then when I want to shoot the slingshot, I snap the attach point back to its original position, and then I apply an impulse to the object which shoots it off. And that's the basics of how it works. I got it functionally working pretty fast, and then after that I just had a bunch of design decisions that I had to make. The first one was how much control do I actually want to give to the player. I didn't want them to have full aiming control. I didn't want them to be able to aim left and right and go wherever they want. I thought that was too complex, and it was just a little unnecessary for what I needed. I also thought about just making it a fixed spot that the slingshot would shoot at, but I wanted some level of choice about where you do shoot it. I think giving some choice to the players allows for a little more interesting puzzles to solve, so I wanted some sort of middle ground. And what I ended up doing was fixing the camera whenever you aim the slingshot, so you can only aim forwards, but you can choose the power level of your shot, which affects the distance that the object will travel. So if you pull back the object really far, the object will shoot really far. If you pull it back just a little bit, it'll only go a little bit. Now because there is a variable power level, I needed some way for the player to know how far the object will actually go when it's shot. I didn't want them to just have to guess or experiment through trial and error. I didn't want that. And throughout the design of this game so far, my general philosophy has been to avoid as much non-diegetic or non-in-world UI as possible. So like, for example, for the health of my character, I have the petals that fall off when you get damaged. And for the gliding stamina with the dandelion, I have the little fuzz things that come off, and you can tell how much stamina you have based on how much fuzz is on the dandelion. I've been trying to keep it that way for the most part, but in this case, I think it's more important to be able to convey the information to the player. I want them to know where the projectile is going to be going. And I don't really think there's an in-world way of doing that. So what I did was just added a predicted trajectory path based on how far you pull it back. It's just this blue glowing arc that shows you where it's going to go. And to get this set up, I first started to look into physics formulas to calculate the trajectory myself, but it turns out that Unreal actually has a node that just does it for you, which is perfect. That makes it easier for me. So I used this node, I attached a spline to the data points that it gave me, and I was done. Now, with the trajectory path in place, with my fixed camera set up right now behind the player, it was very hard to see the trajectory because it would just be one big line. So what I decided to do was make the camera move a little more dynamically when you pull the object back. So it starts off at a little bit of an angle, and then as the player pulls the object back, the camera zooms out, and it also turns even more at an angle so that you can see the full arc of the trajectory. And you can also see the landing spot. I wanted you to be able to see the entire thing. So I got that to a spot that I was happy with. The next thing to address was the player clipping through the rope. to use the slingshot, you have to stand right next to the rope, and when you pull it back, inevitably the rope clips through the player because the player is just still standing there. Now, this doesn't impede any functionality with the rope, with the slingshot, but it does break immersion, and I found it distracting whenever I saw it. So I decided to fade out the player whenever you start aiming. And I actually like this enough that I implemented it into all the other things that you aim in the game, like the laser and the mirror. So when you aim all those, the player disappears. And then when you stop aiming, the player comes back. This also just allows you to focus more on what you're aiming at. You don't actually have to look at the player, which can be a little distracting. You just fully focus on the slingshot. And then the last thing I needed to address was the direction that the player is aiming the slingshot. The direction will always be perpendicular to the rope, but there are two directions that are perpendicular to the rope. And I wanted to give the player the option to aim in both of those directions. Now, originally I had the player choose which direction based on where the character was standing. So I had set up some collision boxes on either side of the rope, and if you're in one of them, then it would shoot one way. If you're in the other, it would shoot the other way. I found this setup to be okay because most of the time the player is going to be trying to stand behind the rope whenever they're shooting, but sometimes it caused some unintuitive camera behavior. Specifically, if the player accidentally runs past the rope and then they press the button to aim, the camera would swing 180 degrees the other way, and it'd be really jarring. So instead of basing it on the character position, instead I decided to base it on the direction that the camera is pointing. Because in almost all cases, the player will be looking in the direction that they want to shoot. So when you push the aim button, the camera will swing to the position its angle is closer to. This way, if the player accidentally runs past the rope, they're still looking in the direction they want to shoot, so that will still be the direction that they shoot. And I have a working slingshot in my game. I can do all the things that I could before with the tightrope, so I can aim the tightrope, attach it to different points, grow it and shrink it depending on if it's in the Nectar or not. I can walk across it, jump on it, but now in addition to all of that, I can also use it as a slingshot to shoot objects across the map. I'm very happy with how it turned out. If you're interested in learning more about the game and my process developing other parts of this game, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you have questions for me, or if you just want to join our community, I have a Discord server. Link to that is in the description. And if you're just interested in the game or you want to support me, there's a Steam page and you can go over there and wishlist the game. That's the best way to help me. Thanks.